Welcome to the RJLT Economics. Today I have a couple of issues I want to discuss, and I think I will make them into two separate podcasts. And both of these issues arise from my listening to independent podcasts. And one of them is concerning the conflict in Eastern Europe today. Another one is concerning the inflation situation in the global economy. In this particular podcast, I want to discuss an idea that I've heard being mentioned by several commentators, most notably Scott Ritter, that Russia has been engaging in this quote-unquote maneuver warfare. And when I heard of this comment the first time, I thought there was must be a mistake. And the development since I've heard this comment, this type of comment, has led me to really has given me the idea that I should make a podcast and discuss this issue. And today, in this podcast, I will discuss first, what is maneuver warfare? Second, I want to give some examples from World War II that you can refer to, that you can research yourself. And compare the difference between a maneuver warfare and a trench warfare. And thirdly, and of course, I want to discuss why I think Russia has not been engaging in maneuver warfare. First, let's talk about what is a maneuver warfare. Maneuver warfare, I think, is best first described. Could be wrong, but I heard before that from military historians that was first described and most best practiced by the unsurprisingly by the Prussians, and it was called something like Bewegungskrieg. Bewegungskrieg, and the idea is to use instead of fighting your enemy head on, what you do is you maneuver your enemy, your army to move very quickly to the flank of your enemy, and then because the flank is supposed to be weaker, right? And then you move. You try to encircle your enemy, and then from all surrounding, all the perimeters that's surrounding your enemy, you then give this coup de grace, right? Coup de grace. That's basically what, basically the original maneuver warfare or Bewegungskrieg is about. It is not about moving your troops around, but really it's a way of maneuvering to encircle and then defeat your enemy's armies. It's not about moving your troops around, right? And no matter how quickly you can deploy or redeploy your troops, unless you are engaging enemy while maneuvering, you're not in a situation of maneuver warfare. So this is a big distinction, right? And I think from the lessons of World War II, this basically means that usually, at least what the Germans did, was to start with bombing, aerial bombing for a couple of days, and then artillery before you start to send in your armored divisions, and then you very quickly break enemy lines, go to their flank, and encircle as much of your enemy as possible. This requires a very strong supply line, and I think the Russians, the Soviets, were also very good practitioners of maneuver warfare in World War II, but they only became great at it from, I would say, from 42 and from 43. Absolutely, they became very good at this maneuver warfare. They were rather weak in the beginning. They were quite good with their bombardment, artilleries, and then they were very good with the armored charges, but they were not good in supplying the armored vehicles, which had resulted in really astronomical losses in the first months of the war. This is mainly because their forces that were sent in to encircle the Wehrmacht instead got themselves encircled, because maneuver warfare is really about trying to encircle each other, right? And because they couldn't supply their troops. And this was also the reason that during Operation Barbarossa, the Wehrmacht had to stop for several times. They had to stop because their flank became too weak, and their supply lines were basically incapable of maintaining a decent supply for the frontline troops to continue to march forward. So that was maneuver warfare. Some of the examples of World War II that we can look into, that you can look into if you're interested, includes the Battle of Poland. That was a classic one, and this was, I think, by some military historians, one of the first times that modern maneuver warfare had been used, including aerial bombardment before the real movement of the panzer divisions. There's the Battle of France, with notably what is known, I think, is the Manstein Plan, if I'm not mistaken, which basically involved going through the Ardennes and then moved all the way to very quickly to the sea, to Boulogne, and this cut off the major forces of the Allied troops, and this led to the battle in what is the town in northern, let's just say in northern France, which led to really severe losses of the Allied troops, and this eventually led to the quick fall of the French government and the French resistance. That was a classic. There is the Battle of Kiev. This was not as iconic, but it was still something to keep in mind of, because I think this was when the Soviets really lost the opportunity to pull out, because in Kiev they had a good opportunity to really pull out of Kiev, and that would have helped save them up to 500,000 of troops and a lot of equipment, and that would have given them much better opportunity of countering the Germans in defending, let's say, for example, Moscow. Let's just say Moscow. I think that was the Battle of Kiev. That's a classic one. The Battle of Moscow. That's very that is iconic, and this was the turning point. Well, by some historians, this was the turning point of World War II, at least in the European theater on the Eastern Front, because once it was not really the movement of the Wehrmacht, but really it was the counteroffensive, the winter counteroffensive of the Soviets which, if you remember from a lot of the Soviet films or propaganda documentaries, whatever you call it, that there were these troops that participated in the parade of the revolution on the Red Square, and they were sent directly to the battlefield. And I think most of them became casualties because the casualties were very, very high. And I think that was a very iconic battle. That was something that you can look at. There were a lot of battles around Kharkov. I think Kharkov was taken and liberated several times, but that was not really iconic. The Battle of Kursk, that was the final strategic offensive by the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. That was the largest, I think, the largest mechanized war in the history of wars. So that was very iconic, and we see a lot of maneuver warfare there. And finally, I think the final strategic offensive of the Wehrmacht, and this time, of course, on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge, that was something that was also quite iconic, and absolutely, it was an example of maneuver warfare. So these are examples of maneuver warfare. What is not a maneuver warfare is the Stalingrad, although I think it was called Operation Uranus, which the Soviet engaged, that basically encircled the Sixth Army, the largest army of the Wehrmacht, and subsequently relieved the siege on Stalingrad. That was a great, perfect example of maneuver warfare. Right. So these are some of the things that you can look into, and you can see what difference they are. What are the differences between that and the current situation in Ukraine? In my judgment, of course, I'm not an expert. I'm not a military expert. So if you want to ask, what's your credential? What makes you trustworthy on this? Well, you are listening to some guy talking on YouTube or whatever other podcast platforms that you are using. Don't really think too much about credibility. This is just an idea, and you are the one that should make your own decision. I'm just providing the information. Thirdly, let's talk about why not. Why do I think that the Russians are not? Why do I think? Why the Russians are not using the maneuver warfare or Bewegungskrieg. I think this really is reflected in how the Russians describe this operation. They call it the special military operation. And I think in a way, this is correct. Even though it is war, it is an invasion, but it's also special in the sense that you do not want to destroy the country. When the Wehrmacht went into Poland, when the Wehrmacht went to northern France, when the Wehrmacht went to the Soviet Union, what they did was brutal, right? They bombed entire blocks, and they, of course, they were not distinguishing the military from civilians. They were in fact engaging in genocide. In fact, their proclaimed goal was to rid Eastern Europe of Slavs, and they want to push them to Asia, push the Russians to Asia. I want to take all the European part of the Soviet Union, and that was their stated goal. So they felt absolutely comfortable killing Slavs. So, but this situation is quite different here in Ukraine, because the Russians, at least to the extent that the Russians have gone into Ukraine, it has gone into areas that at least the Russians identify as pro-Russian parts of Ukraine. And the goal, I think, the political objective is to not just annex these regions, but also to integrate the population, the local population. And of course, a lot of the local populations are Russian-speaking, and some of them identify themselves as Russians. So it's not suitable for the Russians to use this indiscriminate aerial bombing or use a lot of artillery. This basically makes it very difficult for them to actually go ahead and encircle the enemy troops. At the same time, we must also see that another character of today's conflict is that a main focus is in the Donbas region. And in this region, the Ukrainians have spent a lot of time, 8 years, in building and reinforcing their defensive installments. It was like bunkers, right? A huge defense line. And they can hunker down in there for a very long time. And you see the problem here again that the Russians face compared to the situation in World War II, this time in France, is that whereas in the Battle of France, what the Wehrmacht wanted to do was to actually take Paris and force a surrender. What the Russians want to do is not to take Kiev and force a surrender. Of course, if the plan of Russia involves taking Kiev, that would be possible. They could engage in maneuver warfare. They could, but of course they need a larger army. They need a deeper commitment in order to do that. But now I think what they want to do is to liberate, quote unquote, the regions of Donbas. I think also Kharkov, all the way Nikolaev, and all the way down to Odessa. So that, I think, is their plan. I think they probably will achieve their military objective. The question I think that we should be asking is not so much that whether the Russians will win the military war, but rather whether the Russians will win the overall political war, right? Whether the Russians will be successful in integrating this region. Because if the Russians are successful in integrating this region and bring it into the Russian economy, then I think the Russian economy can experience a great growth, because there are more resources, even though Russia is not lacking in any. There are a lot of manpower, still quite a lot of manpower, and a lot of intellect, brain power there. And also some research facilities. So if the Russians become successful, they could scale up their economy correspondingly. That could be good. But if the Russians are unsuccessful there, if a lot of the infrastructures there are destroyed in achieving the military success, then it will be more difficult for Russia to really win overall, to integrate this region. And this can be a problematic situation going forward, right? Especially considering that the world is entering into a period of economic hardship that can last years, if not a couple of decades. And this means that, that the external environment is not necessarily very conducive to economic growth. So that means that there are some challenges there. Another question I think that we should ask is whether the Europeans can avoid losing too much. I think they have already lost. The Europeans have lost in their economy, is suffering. And I think, in my view, I have repeated this multiple times, I think that the euro will disappear in a few years. And I think recovery is going to be very long because the burdens of the current economic system on the European economy is such that they are not designed, they are not oriented to a quick recovery. So let's just leave it as that. And finally, another question we all know ask is that can the Americans achieve their strategic objective, which is basically bog Russia down and then focus on China? I think this is getting a little bit more difficult, but let's not say that it's never going to happen, because Russia, even though it probably will win militarily, and it has a good chance, in my judgment, of winning overall in the integration of parts of Ukraine that it annexes. It may still be bogged down economically and militarily, because it needs to pay a lot of attention to that region, at least for the foreseeable future. That means that its ability to be to facilitate or help China in engaging in any conflict in the Pacific region, is diminished. At the same time, China is not really doing that well, especially considering its virus policies, which, I don't think this type of policy is implemented anywhere, right? Is a wise one. It was, in my judgment, unwise when it was introduced in Europe, and it certainly was unwise when it was introduced in North America. And I think it's unwise, and given the strictness that that is being exercised, doubly unwise when it's exercised in China. That means that in the coming years, we're going to see some economic difficulties coming out of China. And that means that it gives just that possibility for America to gain a strategic advantage, or at least to prolong its current strategic advantage in that region for a few years. And this few years of extension could just be enough for America to, at least for a lot of the wealthy guys, the establishment, to make a lot of money from that quote-unquote grift. And that is a strategic objective achieved. Of course, I think in the long run, one way or another, I think Taiwan will be reunited with China. This, I think, is almost inevitable. But exactly how that is going to happen is not something that I can feel very comfortable in predicting. Although that's just, as you can see, there are only so many possibilities. All right, this is the first podcast where I discuss this notion, or I try to perhaps dispel the myth of the maneuver warfare in Russia. Right? Why? Right. One final point that I want to make is that, you see, Russia is not hurting economically. It's actually doing quite well economically. This was also another reason that Russia is not having any increased mobilization. That it basically wants to keep this war going. If it can move slowly but still achieve its military objectives, while at the same time weaken, especially the Europeans economically, then I think the Russians achieving their chances of achieving their overall objective is much higher, because with a weakened Europe that is less able to confront Russia, that basically means that Russia will be earning itself a more stable, let me take that back, not more stable, but more easily defendable Western border. All right, this is my first podcast today. I think I want to make another one about inflation. So check out that one as well. Thanks, and have a great day.